A very warm welcome to all of you. Hope all of you are fine. Today I'm going to be taking my lecture on anatomy of pulp space and axis opening. At the end of this lecture, you should be able to describe the common root and pulpal anatomy of each tooth. You should know how to do an axis cavity preparation and why it's done. What are the basic principles which are followed, and you should know the common errors which you can face when you are actually doing an axis opening for the different kinds of teeth. So what is the pulp cavity? It is the cavity which encloses the pulp, that is the soft tissue of the tooth. So it is divided into the coronal and the radicular portion. So the coronal portion is in the crown, and the radicular is the one which extends into the root. The roof of the pulp chamber is what you have to remove when you're doing the axis opening, which consists of dentine just covering the pulp chamber. So as soon as you remove the roof, or what we call as de-roofing, you are able to see the pulp chamber. Yeah, the floor of the pulp chamber merges into the root canal at the orifices, and the canal orifices are the openings in the floor of the pulp which lead into the root canals. So basically, once you have done your de-roofing, you will be able to see the pulpal chamber and the pulpal floor, and you will be able to appreciate the orifices. These orifices are what lead into the root canals. So you should know what pulp horns are and how to manage them. So pulp horns are the accentuations or the extensions of the roof of the pulp chamber directly under a cusp or a developmental lobe. Yeah, and they vary in height and location. And the number of pulp horns, they correspond to the number of developmental lobes of the tooth. So for example, you have the maxillary center incisor, which have 3. Even the mandibular center incisor and the lateral incisor have 3. The maxillary first molar has 4. The second molar might have 3. The mandibular first molar has 4 or 5, and so on and so forth. Coming to the root canal, like I said before, it extends from the canal orifice to the apical foramen. So I am sure you all know what the apical foramen is, and I will be discussing about it in the later slides also. The branching of the lateral canal is called as the accessory canal. So you generally have lateral and accessory canals in the apical third. That is the most common area where you can find them. Constrictions and curvatures before terminating at the apex, this is generally seen, and I'm sure you will be able to appreciate it even radiographically when you deal with the root canals. Now coming to the apical root anatomy, the apical constriction, which I was mentioning about, it is also known as the minor apical diameter. It is the narrowest diameter in the root canal of the tooth, whereas the apical foramen is also known as the major apical diameter. So this is where the blood vessels actually enter into the canal. So this is a retrograde entry. So it is not from the top to the bottom, but it is from the bottom to the top. So the blood vessels are actually entering from the periodontium area into the canal. So it is a funnel shaped entity. Your root canal should end technically at the minor apical constriction. That is your minor apical diameter at the apical constriction. If you violate the apical constriction, then you lose your tug back effect, which I'm sure you all are feeling when you are doing your preclinicals. Okay. The cemento-dentinal junction is the area where the pulp ends and the periodontium starts. It is generally 1 mm from the apical foramen. And an apical delta is seen as a triangular area of the root. You can probably appreciate it better in radiographs when you are entering in the clinics. Now, the isthmus is often found in teeth with multiple canals. We generally appreciate it really well when we deal with the maxillary first premolar. It is a narrow ribbon-shaped communication between the canals, and the significance is that if you leave behind the isthmus, that means if you don't do your de-roofing properly and you just expose the orifices on the buccal and the palatal side, for example, in the maxillary first premolar, and you do not actually de-roof properly in the junction between the orifices, you will leave behind a ribbon of necrotic pulp tissue. So that can be responsible for your failed root canals. That is why it is important for us to do de-roofing to actually gain complete access towards the root canal. Now coming to common root canal configurations, there are various scientists had given various categories. So Wien, a very famous dentist of his time, gave 4 categories. Here you can see type 1 to type 4, whereas type 1 is one canal orifice leads to one exit. Type 2 is two canal orifices will lead to a single exit, so that means they merge at the apex. Type 3 is there are two canal orifices and they have two separate exits. And type 4 is one canal orifice will have two different exits. So that means it splits probably in the cervical or the middle third, and then you have two different exits. So I have written down the numbers also. It's easier for, it's like a kind of coding, so it's easier for you to remember. So 1 corresponds to the type 1, 2 1 corresponds to the type 2, wherein you have two canal orifices and one common exit, so on and so forth. There was a very important dentist, a very famous dentist called Vertucci, who actually categorized it into 8 different types. So I have written down the coding also for easier understanding. So type 1 corresponds to the same like the one given by Wien, where you have one orifice and one exit. Type 2 is where you have two orifices and then the pulp actually, the root canals actually converge and you have one single exit. Type 3 is where you have one orifice, it splits into two canals in the middle, and then again it merges back into one at the apex. So it is a 1-to-1 combination. Type 2 is very simple. That means you have two canals and you have you have two orifices and you have two exits from the root canal apex. Type 5 is where you have only one root canal orifice, but it splits in the middle or the apical third and you have two different exits. Type 6 is a little more complicated, where you have two root canals. They merge probably in the cervical or the middle third into one root canal, and then again immediately after merging they split back and you have two different exits from the root end. And coming to type 7, this is even more complicated. So it has two different splits at two different locations. So it starts off as a single orifice. You have a single orifice. It splits probably in the cervical or the middle third. So you have two. Then immediately after the split, it merges back into one. And then again, after merging back immediately, probably in the apical third, it splits back into two and you have two different exits for your pulp canals. And type 8 is where you have three orifices and three separate exits. Now, what are the methods of determining this pulpal anatomy? How do you know, what kind of classification you are dealing with, whether it's a type 1, type 2, type 3, type 4 and all. So various different methods are there. So you can either do your anatomical studies. That means you actually carry out scans, or you actually, take cross sections, you dissect the teeth, and then you carry studies on a number of teeth, and then you're able to generalize what percentage of this classification is common in which kind of tooth. You have radiographical evaluation. So when you take your pre-op radiograph, you try and judge from different by taking different angulations of your pre-op. You can actually see what kind of anatomy you're going to be dealing with. Exploration using an endodontic explorer, you can actually check to see how many orifices are there, and then corresponding with your radiograph, you can actually see how many different kinds of types, how many different exits are there from the apical foramen, that is from the apex of the tooth. Then of course you have your recent advances, that is you have your CT scans, where you can actually get CT, and your MRI, where you can actually get your three-dimensional images, so you can actually appreciate your root canal anatomy better. You can create an endogram, where you just have to inject a dye. In this case it is Ruddle solution, and then when you take a diagnostic image, then you will actually be able to see where the dye has spread, and then you will be able to appreciate the root canal anatomy better. The in vitro methods, this is what I was talking about before. You can actually section your teeth, use dyes like methylene blue and fluorescent sodium to actually see the way it spreads, the dye is spreading, and the path it takes. So then obviously you will be able to know what kind of root canal anatomy the tooth had. You can use contrasting media, you can clear off your roots, and you can use your scanning electron microscope to analyze the root canal anatomy of your teeth. Now coming to the variations in the internal anatomy of the teeth, I'm sure all of this has been dealt with, all these conditions have been dealt with in oral pathology, but you need to know how this variation can actually have an impact when it comes to your pulpal anatomy. So in the case of gemination, I'm sure you already know it is two crowns which are joined and they actually have a single root. So you should be expecting only a single root canal. So don't go ahead looking for two root canals if you come across a tooth which is geminated. Yeah, but on the other hand, when you have fusion, there are actually two tooth buds which actually fuse into one. So in this case you will have two separate root canals. So this is where the difference lies. In the case of concrescence, everything is going to be normal because the teeth are merged only at the level of the cementum, that is in the root surface. In the case of taurodontism, that is your bull-shaped tooth, your pulp chamber is also going to be very large, okay? But your root length is going to be small. So you can expect your working length to be a little smaller when compared to your normal teeth. But the pulp chamber is large, so you're going to spend a considerable amount of time to remove the pulp from the coronal third and from the uh, and at the pulp chamber. That means at the pulpal chamber. Yeah. Now dilacerations, I'm sure you all know. The maxillary lateral incisor is the most common example because you have a dilacerated tip. Even your molar teeth, as you can see in the radiograph below, you can see that the root tips can be curved. So in these cases, of course, when you are doing a root canal, you have to be careful because you have to expect a certain amount of resistance when you enter the curvature region, and the chances of separation of your instrument are high. Coming to Talon's cusp, it is nothing but an outgrowth on the lingual side. So this should not make you doubt that there is an additional pulp horn. You just have to continue with your root canal as it is. Now coming to dentinogenesis imperfecta, I am sure you all know. Then of course the hard tissues are actually a little weaker, so you have to be careful. You should not actually go and do excess preparation out of over enthusiasm or zeal. So you have to be able to control your aerotor when you are actually dealing with dentinogenesis imperfecta. The tooth might get prepared a lot faster. Your access opening might be done a lot faster than when dealing with your normal teeth. Coming to dentine dysplasia, it is a genetic disorder and it affects the dentine production and it causes your malformation of your root. So if you can see in the radiograph, you can actually see that the root is actually malformed and it is very thin when compared to normal. So you have to be very careful that you don't end up perforating. Yeah. A lingual groove, this can be an accessory spread for your root canal caries. So if your lingual groove is contaminated by caries, then the prognosis can become very poor because that caries can go all the way up till the end of the root tip. So that is why you have to actually diagnose whether the tooth actually has a lingual groove or not. Extra canals, I'm sure you're all aware. The maxillary first molar is the best example. Even the mandibular lateral incisor, there are chances of having two root canals in 44% of the cases. The maxillary first molar, the chance of having a second mesiobuccal canal is more than, the percentage is more than 80% now, especially with the introduction of the dental operating microscope. So more and more number of cases have been found. Dens invaginatus and dens evaginatus. Okay, so now dens invaginatus is commonly known as a tooth within a tooth. So you will have an infolding of enamel into your dentine. So in this case, when you are dealing with your pulpal anatomy, you have to worry about the pulp horns which are going to be present on either side. So cleaning of the pulp horns is going to be of prime importance when you are dealing with dens evaginatus. You will find some pulpal extensions on the mesial and the distal sides. That is where you have to take care. Whereas in the dens evaginatus, that is an extra bump or cusp, you might find a pulp horn which is actually growing into that pulp, into that extra bump or cusp. So that also has to be removed when you are treating that tooth endodontically. The premolars, especially the mandibular premolars, are the most common teeth which actually have this extra bump or cusp. You might even know them as I mean, you will probably be seeing them clinically as well. Now Now coming to the variations in shape of the pulp cavity, I'm sure this is very clear, the first one, because the maxillary lateral incisor also has this kind of an anatomy. You will have a gradual curve, and you will have dilacerations, especially for the maxillary laterals. Coming to the C-shaped canals, this is most commonly found in your mandibular second molar. So it will probably be seen in that tooth, and what will happen is it will be one continuous canal which is running from the mesial to the distal side. So it will look like an apostrophe or a C, depending on the classification of the C-shaped canal anatomy. There are 3 or 4 types that you can actually read about. It's quite interesting, and it is often seen in the Southeast Asian community, so it is quite a common finding. Bayonet shaped root canal, as you can see in the radiograph, the third radiograph, you can actually see the kind of shape which you can expect. It is like a zigzag pattern, and so you have to modify your cleaning and shaping techniques accordingly, because you do not want to create excessive pressure and then actually cause a perforation on any of the ends of the curvature. Coming to pulp stones and calcification, if you actually look at the first molar, the mandibular first molar in the first radiograph, on the distal root, in the distal pulp chamber aspect, you can actually see a calcification. So that is your pulp stone. So the pulp stones have to be removed so that you can get unobstructed access to your working length. So you can either remove them with a spoon excavator, or you can use your ultrasonics to actually dislodge them. I wouldn't suggest using the aerotor and the burr, because you might end up damaging the pulpal floor. If you damage the pulpal floor, the chances of perforation are higher. Calcification of root canals also happens because of constant irritation or trauma. So that is also a very common finding. Internal resorption, I'm sure you all know, you have all heard of the pink tooth of Mammary. So in this case, you will see the ballooning kind of pulp in the root canal. So in these cases, to do your obturation, cleaning and shaping is a little more difficult. So for obturation, you actually have to use your thermoplasticized or your heated gattapacha. Your traditional gattapacha obturation will not be successful. Coming to your external root resorption, you can actually see the root being eaten away. You can see it in the last radiograph. You can see that the tooth has been eaten away, and in these cases you have to be careful, because this external resorption can hamper your root canal also. So when you are doing your cleaning and shaping, you might actually touch the external resorption and create a communication between the pulp canal and the external root resorption. So then the prognosis of the tooth actually goes down. So minimal amount of endodontic preparation has to be done in such cases. Now coming to the variations in the apical third, I'm sure you all know there are different locations for your apical foramen. So it does not, that means it is not necessary for your radiographic apex and your anatomic apex to be the same. That means the radiographic apex is the apex which you actually appreciate in your radiographs, but the anatomic apex, that is your minor apical constriction and your major apical constriction, may not actually conform to the radiographic apex. There might be a slight variation, so that has to be anticipated. Lateral and accessory canals, I already told you, they are most commonly found in the apical third. They are also found in the level of furcation also, especially when that of course means when you are dealing with your molar teeth, but they are most commonly found in the apical 1/3. Now open apex, it's also known as a blunderbuss canal. So in these cases, doing your obturation is a little more tough. So you will actually have to create something known as an apical plug, so that you do not over obturate and the GP does not actually get pushed beyond the apex of the tooth. So in those cases, you actually have to create an apical plug using MTA, biodentine or calcium hydroxide, followed by your thermoplasticized obturation. Thermoplasticized obturation will be covered in your obturation techniques, so you will learn about it then. It is nothing but your heated and softened gattapacha which actually flows in. You are actually injecting the gattapacha into the variations in size of the tooth. I'm sure you all know of macrodontia and microdontia. Corresponding to the size of the tooth, your pulp chamber is also going to be different. So for macrodontia, your pulp chamber size volume is also going to be higher, whereas for microdontia you can expect a smaller size pulp volume. Factors affecting the internal anatomy, with age, of course, you see there is a regression in the shape and size. So your pulp chamber actually becomes narrower and narrower when compared to the young patients. Irritants such as caries, attrition, abrasion, erosion, they actually cause changes in your internal anatomy. These irritants can also cause pulp stones and calcification. Calcific metamorphosis, that it's just like your pulp stones. And then you have your resorption, like how you saw your internal resorption and your external resorption. This can also affect your pulpal anatomy. Now coming to the axis opening, it is the part of the cavity from the occlusion table to the canal orifice. So how your axis opening is going to be modified when it comes to each tooth. So it factors. Now what are the objectives of your axis cavity prep? The first is that you want to gain straight line access to the apical foramen or to the initial curvature of the canal. So your axis cavity prep should be wide enough for you to actually gain straight line access, but at the same time you have to conserve sound tooth structure. You cannot go around destroying all the sound dentine, because you are actually weakening the tooth from within. Yeah. So your straight line access should be achieved. You should be able to locate all your orifices of that particular tooth, and at the same time you should be able to conserve sound tooth structure. So you should know when to draw the line and when you know that it is over prepared and when it is under prepared. So what are the principles of your axis cavity preparation? You have to have an outline form, a convenience form. It's something similar to your cavity preparations, the principles of cavity preparation which you have studied in operative dentistry. Removal of the remaining carious, dentine and defective restorations, and the cavity. Now what is the outline form? This is established by projecting the internal anatomy of the tooth to the external surface. So that means your pulpal anatomy is going to determine what kind of axis opening and outline form you have to maintain for that particular tooth. Also there are some other factors also which play a role. One is the size of the pulp chamber. So young patients will have a larger size pulp chamber, so you will have to do a little more broader kind of you will have to maintain a broader outline form, whereas for older patients, because it would have regressed and the pulp space actually diminishes with age, your axis opening can be a little more conservative. So your outline form does not have to be as extensive when compared to when you are dealing with young patients. The second is the shape of the pulp chamber. So this depends upon the type of tooth you are dealing with. So with your anteriors, you generally have a triangular shape of a pulp chamber. The premolars, you will have an oval or ovoid shape, and your molars, it can be triangular and sometimes it can be rhomboidal or slightly rectangular also. So this determines the shape of your axis opening as well. So if you want to remove the entire pulp from the pulp chamber, the axis opening shape has to mimic the shape of your pulp chamber as well. That is when you will be able to extirpate all the pulp from the pulp chamber. The third factor is the number and direction of the root canal. So obviously I'm sure you know that the maxillary first molar has 3 roots, but it may have 3 or 4 root canals: the mesiobuccal 2, the ristobuccal and the palatal. So the number and direction of the root canals also plays a role in your outline form. So you want to be able to gain straight line access to all of these the root canals. So you should be able to visually see your root canal orifices, and you should be able to gain straight line access to all of these root canals. Now what is convenience form? It's very simple to understand even in English. So it is the form which you give to improve your visibility, your instrumentation and obturation of the root canal by providing a straight line access. So these are the things which you need to find. You need to get unobstructed access to the orifices, direct access to the apical foramina, or at least to the first curvature in the root canal. So obviously if you are dealing with a tooth which has an apical curvature, you will obviously not be able to gain direct access till the apical foramina. So you should be able to gain direct access at least till the curvature. You should be able to have complete authority over the instrument, as in you should not, the instrument should not be bending even before it has entered into the root canal. So what it means to say is that if you have a straight line axis, your file should be able to go easily inside the root canal. If you have not done your deroofing properly, you will be actually forced to place your files in an angulated position. So that leads to a tension within the file, and the chances of separation are higher. You also have to develop this convenience form so that you can accommodate your obturation techniques also. So you have to try and understand that when you are doing your obturation, you have to actually have enough space to place your accessories cones, and you have to be able to place your spreader as well. So if you have done only partial deroofing, it is going to be very difficult for you to obturate the canals. Removal of remaining carious, dentine and defective restorations. The reasons for removing are, of course, the first one is to eliminate your bacteria. So you don't want to recontaminate or cross contaminate your root canal. You want to eliminate your discolored tooth structure, because it will evidently show as a discoloration in the later years after you have done your root canal. And you want to eliminate the possibility of coronal leakage. So that means if there is a defective restoration, of course you will have the chances of micro leakage, and that will actually compromise the integrity of your post endodontic restoration. So then your root canal complex may also land up in failure. So all your hard work will go to waste. That is why you want to have an intact coronal restoration. The toilet of the cavity is nothing but your cavity after the preparation has been done. So all caries, debris and necrotic material should be flushed out by the irrigant from the pulp chamber before your radicular preparation is begun, to avoid obstruction of the root. Okay, so now there are certain laws which have been given by Krasner and Rankau. They are two famous researchers of their time. This is to help you actually locate your root canal orifices and to help you to understand the root canal anatomy of each particular tooth. The first is the law of centrality. So according to this law, the floor of your pulp chamber is always located in the center of the tooth at the level of the CEJ. So you have to understand that when you are going to be dealing with the root canal, the floor is always going to be found in the middle of the tooth at the level of the CEJ. Okay, so this plays an important role, especially when you have teeth which are which are recessed, and you can actually see the CEJ at your above the level of the gum. So you should not actually go in deeper and cause a perforation. So these kind of things have to be anticipated before you start your access opening. The second is the location of the CEJ. I hope you know that CEJ is the cemento enamel junction. So this is a very important landmark. The cemento enamel junction is the only most consistent repeatable landmark for locating the pulp chamber, because the distance from the external surface of the crown to the wall of the pulp chamber. So the external surface of the crown, that means the tooth surface, the enamel surface, the distance from the enamel surface to the wall of the pulp is same throughout the circumference of the tooth. So wherever you can actually measure your distance from the external tooth structure to the wall of the pulp chamber, the distance is going to be roughly the same. That is why but this of course is from the level of the CEJ. This is why the CEJ is considered as the most consistent landmark for locating your pulp chamber. Now coming to the first law of symmetry, this can be a little confusing to retain in your memory, but once you understand it, it will actually help you understand in deciding how many root canals you are supposed to be expecting in a tooth, yeah, especially when it comes to the molars. Yeah. Now the first law of symmetry is, except for the maxillary molars, the canal orifices are equidistant from a line drawn in a mesiodistal direction through the center of the pulp chamber floor. So if you can see the long vertical line which is drawn from the mesial to the distal, you will be able to understand that the canal orifices are actually equidistant from this long vertical line. That means if one canal orifice is say 2 mm away from this line, the other canal is also going to be 2 mm away. So that means the mesiobuccal and the mesiolingual are actually going to be 2 mm away from this line which is drawn. Yeah. So it is equidistant from the line drawn in a mesiodistal direction through the center of the pulp chamber floor. The second law, again, it is an exception from the maxillary molars. So except for the maxillary molars, the canal orifices lie on a line perpendicular to the line drawn in a mesiodistal direction. So if you can see the long vertical line which is drawn from the mesial to the distal, and you can see two short lines which are drawn perpendicular to it. So what these laws state are that the canal orifices are going to lie on these two short lines which are drawn perpendicular to the line drawn in a mesiodistal direction across the center of the pulp chamber floor. The law of color change, this is very helpful to identify which is the pulp chamber and which is the wall, because the pulp chamber floor is always going to be darker when compared to the walls. So it is going to be dark brown when compared to light brown color of the walls of the dentine. The laws of orifice location, the orifices of the root canals are always located at the junction of the wall that is the white, and the floor, which is the brown color over here, which you can see in the diagram. So it is always located at the junction, and it is located at the angles of the floor wall junction. So you can actually see in this diagram, it is always located at the angles, that means at the line angles of the floor wall junction. And the third law of orifice location is the orifices are always located at the terminus of the root's developmental fusion lines. So these developmental fusion lines also serve as a dentinal map. So you can actually see that the root canal orifices are located at the ends of these lines. So this is how you can actually scout for or look for your root canal orifices. Now coming to the step for your maxillary center incisors is going to be roughly triangular, like was discussed in the previous slides, where the base of the triangle is facing the incisal third and the apex is facing the cervical third. When it comes to the canine, almost sort of reverses. That means you can actually see a flame shaped access opening, wherein the base is it is, although it is rounded, but it is somewhat like a triangle, where the base is actually located to the cervical third and the apex is located toward the to the tip of the cuspid. Yeah, and that is why it is narrower mesiodistally. The access opening is actually narrower mesiodistally, because of which the shape is also the shape of the access opening is also changed. Now, what are the errors you can come across when you are doing the access opening, especially for the maxillary anteriors? The first is the gouging of the labial wall. You can actually see the error in the first radiograph. This is because you have not taken into consideration the lingual axial angulation of the tilt, or the of the tooth, that is the tilt of the tooth linguoaxially. So in such cases you will cause gouging or perforation of the labial wall. The gouging of the distal wall is because you have failed to recognize, that is the second diagram. The gouging of the distal wall is caused because you have failed to recognize the inclination mesioaxially. So some teeth are actually tilted mesioaxially, because of which if you do not compensate for that by tilting your handpiece accordingly, you will cause gouging of the distal wall. Last but not least, the perforation. So this is very dangerous. This is when you do not take the steps to complete your convenience extension. So basically, when you're as soon as you make the entry ditch cut, you are actually supposed to change your orientation of the burr to make it parallel to the long axis of the tooth. So if you forget to do that and you continue perpendicular to the long axis of the tooth, then you will of course cause the perforation. The prognosis of this tooth, hopeless, because the entire crown is going to be unsupported. So you will have to end up extracting the tooth. So this is why your access opening decisions to be taken before access opening are important. Now, maxillary premolars, you have to understand that this is the transition from your anterior to your posterior. Over here, this tooth can be a little confusing because the pulp chamber is wider buccopalatally. So you are going to form, you are going to get an oval shape or a dumbbell shaped pulpal chamber, so because of which your shape also has, the shape of your access opening is also going to be oval or dumbbell shape. This is seen wider buccopalatally when compared to mesiodistally of your maxillary anteriors. So this is why some people can get confused. So instead of going buccopalatally, sometimes they might go mesiodistally. So because of which you will sacrifice healthy tooth structure. The canals are usually straight, and you will generally have two canals. So you will have the buccal and the maxillary second premolar. It is a single root, and you generally have only one canal. You might have two also, but they will generally fuse at the end into a. Coming to the maxillary first molar, I'm sure you're all aware, there are three roots with four pulp horns. You have the mesiobuccal, the distobuccal, you have the mesiopalatal and the distopalatal, conforming to the cusps of the tooth. But please keep in mind, these are the pulp horns, not the root canals. The root canals, of course, you have three or four. You have the mesiobuccal, the distobuccal and the palatal. And the mesiobuccal you can have one or two. That means you can have the mesiobuccal 1 and you can have the mesiobuccal 2 as well. The palatal, of course, is the largest, and the mesiobuccal is the narrowest. So generally when you are doing the access opening, the first canal which you are most probably going to find is going to be the palatal. The maxillary second molar, it is very similar to your maxillary first molar, except that it is narrower mesiodistally. So this one also you are going to be having three root canals. You are going to have your mesiobuccal, your distobuccal and your palatal. The maxillary third molar, it generally has three roots, but it can have a lot of variations in the morphology, and it can present from a single canal to up to actually 7 or 8 canals. A case has been reported where you have actually found 7 to 8 canals of root canals in the maxillary third. Coming to the mandibular central incisors, over here you can actually see the triangular shape access opening again, like similar to your maxillary incisors. The pulp chamber is wider labiolingually, same like your maxillary, and you can expect one canal for your maxillary central, but for your maxillary lateral, the chances of actually having two canals are significantly higher. So there is a 44% chance of having two canals. So you can have one buccal and one lingual canal. So that has to be kept in mind when you are doing your access opening for your mandibular lateral incisor. Okay, it is similar even in shape and even in size to your mandibular central incisor. Coming to your mandibular canine, it is again you are going to be having an oval shaped access opening, because the pulp chamber is actually narrow mesiodistally. So you will have a very slender, although not very thin, it will have a nice tapered shape of the root canal for your mandibular longest teeth. So you have to keep that in mind when you are determining your working length. The mandibular premolars are quite simple, because they are generally single rooted and they have a single root canal. The chances of getting two root canals are also there when it comes to the mandibular first premolar, but the chances are less. Now over here you have to keep in mind, for the mandibular first premolar, the buccal pulp horn is more prominent, whereas for the mandibular second premolar, lingual pulp horn is more prominent. The reason why this is being specified is that when you are doing your deroofing, you have to remove the pulp from the corresponding pulp. You have to remove the corresponding pulp horns from these two teeth. So you should know where to expect more of the pulp horn. So for the mandibular first premolar, your buccal pulp horn is more prominent, whereas for the mandibular second, the lingual pulp horn is more prominent. And another thing is, when you are dealing with your mandibular premolars, you have to expect a 10 to 15 degree lingual tilt. That is why you have to align your aerotor according to the long axis of the tooth. So you should not go and treat it similar to your maxillary maxillary premolars, which are actually almost straight inside the oral cavity, but the mandibular premolars are actually lingually tilted by 10 to 15 degrees. So you should be able to compensate for that tilt by actually aligning your handpiece in such an angle. Now coming to the mandibular first molar, in this case you have 4 to 5 pulp horns, like I had said in the early slides. but you will have two roots, the mesial and the distal, with three canals. So you will have the mesiobuccal, the mesiolingual, and the distal canal. You might also have the possibility of having two distal canals. So when you follow the laws of orifice location, if you find that one distal canal is located directly behind the mesiobuccal or the mesiolingual, in such case you have to suspect that there is going to be one more distal canal. However, if the distal canal is broad and it is located directly in the middle of the line which is equidistant from the mesiobuccal and the mesiolingual canals, then you can suspect that there is only one root canal. This will become a little more clear when you are actually practicing this in your clinic. The mandibular second molar is just like the maxillary, just like the mandibular first molar, but it is smaller. So because of which the orifices are going to be a little more closer to each other. Same as in the case of the maxillary first molar when compared to the maxillary second molar. The second molars are very similar to the first molars, but they are going to be smaller in size, because of which the orifices are going to be located closer to each other. So you should not go and do excess cavity preparation to locate the canals, because they are going to be located right next to each other. The mandibular third molar has varying morphology. It can have one root, it can have two roots, it can even have three roots or more, and the number of canals are also not fixed. It can have ranging from 1 to 3 or maybe 4 or even more root canals. The length is it is generally shortest of the mandibular molars, so you will have a shorter length, and it is somewhere around 17.5 mm, which is a good thing, because being the last tooth, gaining accessibility to do endodontic treatment of the third molar can be generally a little bit difficult, especially in the case of the mandible, because the tongue is also going to provide hindrance. Okay, so that is it from my side. If you guys have any doubts, please feel free to post your comments, and I will be more than happy to get back to you. Please try and understand that this is more of a clinical topic, so you will gain more insight when you are actually doing your preclinicals in the clinics. Okay, thank you guys. Take care. Stay safe.